And we're back. Greetings, everyone. This is Lucian Vâlsan, broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is Herr Jon Gunnarsson, broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer, James Huff, sitting in the background, broadcasting from the US, making sure everything works just fine. Greetings, Mr. Gunnarsson.
Good evening. How's it going?
Well, it's going fine right now, although I was a little bit worried 3 minutes ago. But other than that, I'm also complaining about the weather. It's becoming, again, increasingly hot after a few days that it was just fine.
Yeah, right over here the weather's actually just fine right now. It's pretty warm, but not too warm, and so I have nothing to complain about on that front.
Yeah, well, other than that, we're going to talk about the feminist censorship in the media. You have a very nice story that you dug up in the second part.
I didn't need to do much digging here because it's just all over the German media and recently.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to hear about that because I have some parallels that have happened in other places in Europe, and that would be nice. But until then, let's go with the usual news.
Okay, the first piece of news is from Metro from the UK. Someone has started a petition to class feminism as a, quote, terrorist group, unquote. Do you think feminism is akin to terrorism? Well, now you can sign a petition confirming your belief. That's right, a petition has been started on change.org, which asks the government, doesn't specify which one, to class feminism as a terrorist group, despite the fact that it is a movement, not a group. The petition's error-laden description claims feminism, quote, has constantly attacked men and women for choosing to live their lives the way they want to. It goes on, quote, and it's spelled with ITS here, it's time we stop the violence, it's time we put the stop to the hatred feminists are constantly generating, it's time we stopped women's studies courses, where they missed the apostrophe in women's studies courses from brainwashing women into thinking they're victims. It's time these misandric lunatics are stopped. And lunatics is written with a double O instead of a U. Okay. I guess they missed the author of that article missed the sick after the lunatics there. The petition appears to have been started by a woman called Janet Wilkinson. However, this may be a fake name, as Janet, who has a particularly non-Spanish sounding name, claims to be from Spain. Of course, people can't be from countries with names that don't sound like these countries. For example, my name is Jon Gunnarsson, so I'm obviously not from Germany. Going on with the article. Amazingly, the petition is well on its way to achieving its goal of 7,500 signatures, with 5,300 already putting their names to it. Samuel Black from Borås, Sweden, gave his reasons for signing. Feminism is a hate movement, and if they can try to classify human rights activists as terrorists, then it's only fair to do the same to them. Unquote. We don't think feminists will be worrying too much, though, as the petition has just been met with mild humor and simple dismissal online. Now, since this article has been written, actually more than 10,000 signatures on this, and also there's a poll below the article on Metro asking readers whether they think that feminism is a terrorist group, and something like 2/3 said yes, which is kind of funny, but I also find it worrying because the petition is just so completely and obviously stupid. Like the person who wrote this can't even spell properly and hasn't taken the time to, I don't know, like proofread this or like let someone else read over it. Maybe this person is like doesn't speak English as a first language and so on. But if that's the case, then before you create a petition like that, have someone proofread it for you. Also, as this article quite rightly says, feminism is not a group. it's an ideology or a movement, and as such, it cannot be a terrorist group. That doesn't make any sense. It's like claiming that Islam is a terrorist group, which is just nonsense. Yeah, I mean, there's a Muslim terrorist, but that doesn't mean that Islam is a terrorist group. It's just nonsense.
Well, you can. I mean, for instance, in here, communism is classified as terrorism, and any attempt to form a communist party can get you into severe trouble. So,
yeah, I think that's wrong too.
So yeah, I mean, it is possible legally what the petition is asking. Obviously, it's troll, but on the other hand, it reached its purpose, and the purpose wasn't obviously to convince the government to do that, but is to get people talking about it. I find it quite rich that metro.co.uk has the audacity to correct someone else's English, given that metro.co.uk never has an article that is entirely error-free. And also that point that, oh, but the name doesn't sound Spanish. Yeah, my name is not Popescu either, but that doesn't mean I'm not from Romania. So, I mean, come on. This is just, yeah. Essentially, it's a stupid petition contested by a newspaper that doesn't have quite a history of being non-stupid or stupid-free. So.
Yeah, also like the whole claim, like sure maybe there's been some feminists who do something like terrorism, but it's like a minuscule percentage of people who identify as feminism. So it's just a really stupid claim, and it's actually I'm really worried that a lot of people just support this entirely stupid argument just because they don't like feminism. Like I'm obviously happy that a lot of people don't like feminism, but still you shouldn't support arguments that are just obviously stupid just because they're on the right side.
Yeah, on the other hand, if you read through the comments, it appears that the people who have bothered to comment on this article seem to be far more level-headed, and I've read through like 100 of them, and then I got bored. And I've seen far less stupidity than in the original article or within the petition. So, if the comments are any good metric, it's probably more like even those who voted yes or signed the petition were like, yeah, let's rub it into their faces and let them see how they get angry.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Okay. Let's go to the next one. Oh, the next one is one of my favorite topics. Go ahead, please.
Okay, this is from Spiegel from Germany. Teenage mothers. Poverty created by welfare, not children. And this article is quite long, so I actually cut quite a bit. Little or no education, unstable relationships, lousy job prospects, and as a result, less money. The economic prospects aren't good for women who have a child as a teenager, i.e. between 15 and 19 years, which is not what teenage means, like 13, 14, but whatever. What wasn't clear was the reason. Is it young women being overwhelmed by motherhood and thus not finding an apprenticeship? Or is it generally problematic life circumstances that lead to teenagers getting pregnant earlier? What is the role played by role models such as single mothers and patchwork families, or even by religion? The Institute of Economics, Business and the Social Sciences, WSI, of the union-affiliated Hans Böckler Foundation conducted a study on this topic. For this study, the WSI researcher Eric Seils evaluated a number of international studies, especially from Canada and the US. In the US, where the almost 30 out of 1,000 women between the ages of 15 and 19 are mothers, compared to 8 out of 1,000 in Germany, the research was focused on 4 factors: socioeconomic influences, i.e. social environment and household income, family constellation, religious affiliation, and ethnicity. Some of the studies show that teenagers from poor regions have sex earlier, and the likelihood of teen pregnancy is higher in these regions. However, the WSI study warns that the concrete context, quote, has been relatively little researched so far. Several publications from New Zealand and the United States found that divorce and its consequences, such as financial difficulties, insufficient parental care for daughters, and absent fathers, influences teen pregnancy. According to WSI, broken families are, quote, associated with risky sexual behavior of adolescents and an increased risk of early motherhood, unquote. Skipping a bit here, roughly speaking, the proportion of teen pregnancies is highest in Eastern Germany and lowest in Southern Germany. Again, skipping a bit, the clear result surprised the researchers. Quote, the most important influencing factor is Hartz IV, which is the name for a form of the welfare system, and it's used synonymously for people who receive sort of regular welfare payments, which are lower than what you get from the unemployment insurance, which you get something like, I think, 6 months after you lose your job. So going on, a rise in the proportion of 15 to 19-year-olds receiving Hartz IV of 10 percentage points is associated with an increase of 5 children per 1,000 young women in a region. Skipping another bit, mind you, it's not just the teenage mothers who are more likely to be in welfare, but all teenagers in the region. So according to these data, it's not the pregnancies that came first, but the widespread long-term unemployment. What cannot be ruled out is that there's an unknown third factor causing both welfare recipients and early pregnancy. Science has tested some of these possible factors. And then it goes on to talk about some of these factors, and then concludes with this quote, the disadvantages of early motherhood are overrated, Science says, since they are a symptom of the problem, not their cause.
Interesting.
Definitely interesting. What I want to say is that this is actually quite a good article in terms of sort of science reporting, because they actually don't make these sort of exaggerated claims, except sort of in the title. But that's the title, of course. You sort of want to be a bit clickbaity and so on. But in the article, they actually go to great length to explain things and to explain that there could be for example, there could be this third underlying factor that we don't know about and so on. So they're very careful in their statements there. So I really like that. I want to commend Spiegel for doing that.
Yeah, well, Spiegel from time to time writes something very nice, as opposed to other outlets that I sometimes follow. Yeah, what I really appreciated is that last statement. Teenage pregnancy is an overrated factor. At best, maybe a symptom, but not really the cause. And that is because let's not forget that in many portions of Europe, both Western and Eastern, having kids at 16 was still normal up till very recently. And by recently, I mean mid-80s, probably. I mean, in southern Italy, having a baby at 16 was the norm until mid-80s. So, to turn around then and say that, and make it the main factor, as usually it is being done in some more ideologically driven places, is just a bit disingenuous. I mean, people have been prospering even when they were having kids at the age of 16. So clearly there has to be other factors than just the very fact that some teenage girls choose to have children at the age of 16 or 17 or whatnot.
Yeah, it's not really just Eastern Europe, also in Iceland.
Yeah, that's what I said, both Eastern and Western. I mean, it's not really a new thing.
Yeah. Like I have 5 aunts. Like my father, who's from Iceland, has 5 sisters, and I think I'm not entirely certain, but I think all of them had their first child by the time they were 20. So, and even today, this is not unusual, or it's not treated like it's a kind of disease to have a child when you're like 19 or 20 or something like that. And it's just that especially in the Anglosphere, and now also in Western Europe definitely, and increasingly in Eastern Europe, it's people look down on teenage mothers, and they think that this is something that you shouldn't do. And of course, there are problems that interferes with your education and so on, definitely, and with your career. But then so does having a child at basically any age, especially if you're a woman. So nowadays it's mostly people mostly become teenage mothers who are already sort of in a bad situation. So nowadays it's associated with lower socioeconomic status, with low IQ, with being on welfare, and all these other sort of negative factors. And then of course you get all sorts of negative correlations with teenage pregnancy, but it's very difficult to disentangle whether these negative effects are the result of teenage pregnancy or some other factor.
Or it's just an unrelated correlation, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, more and more European countries. I mean, in this country it was like since the 30s, and the Netherlands even earlier than that. They had this sort of way of addressing when a teenage girl was giving birth to a baby. I mean, it's no more than having a medical leave in the school, and you have to skip 1 year because of that. And these kinds of cases can already be addressed to solve the education problem. It already requires really is just a bit of understanding from the professors and teachers and whatnot. And that's increasingly the case all over Europe. I mean, I don't look down upon teenage mothers. I don't think it's a disease. And I know quite a few individuals who have had children before the age of 20, and none of them were welfare recipients or extremely poor. In fact, two of them were actually significantly richer than me. But anyway, so I mean, I don't know. I don't think that is really such a huge issue, and I'm glad that this article points this out exactly that at best it's a symptom, but definitely not a huge basic issue.
Yeah, and I also find it interesting that that despite there being, as I perceive it, this larger stigma to teenage pregnancies in the Anglophone world, it's still much more prevalent in the United States than it is in Germany.
Yes.
So I found that quite interesting. With what was it, 30 per 1,000 in the United States and 8 out of 1,000 in Germany. So that's 4 times as much almost.
Yeah, in here it's something like 11 per 1,000. Yeah, it's still relatively low. That's probably because the United States isn't really such a unified place as we would view it in Europe. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
definitely.
much more similarities between Berlin and Frankfurt than between Midwest and Manhattan. So I mean, there are almost entirely different countries within the United States.
Yeah, that's why they have these things called states, which of course originally were actually states and not just
Yeah.
subdivisions within one country.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Let's go to the next one. The next one is oh yeah. The next one is something very very facepalm worthy. I tried to cut a bit from it, but it's just too much stupid, and it's worth reading as much from it as possible. Coming from The Independent, do we really need scientific research to believe rape victims? And the author goes, before I tell you what I'm on about, I'm going to walk you through a slightly strange hypothetical scenario. Bear with. All will be revealed is in due course. I guess the editors and The Independent are also on vacation. Anyway, imagine that you go to a party, you have a few drinks, and then the host offers to show you some pictures of their holiday up in their bedroom. You toddle to the room with them, but once it's just the two of you alone, they suddenly leap on you and deliberately break your arm. In your drunken state, you might be confused by this, and the enormity of what's happened might not sink in. The next morning, you awake in a hungover fog and realize with increasing horror that your arm is completely broken. Thinking through the night's events, you realize that you were in fact assaulted by the host. When you go to the police to report the assault, they quiz you about how much you drank and the gaps in your memory. You can't remember all the details and struggle to piece it all together. They look at you dubiously. But here, look, my arm is broken. I'm not making it up. The policemen shake their heads and tell you it's your word against theirs. Maybe you were in a fight. Maybe you encouraged the host to break your arm. Who can say? The bottom line is you have a flimsy case. You leave humiliated, confused, and ashamed. Of course, I'm not really talking about a broken arm. Victims of sexual assault and rape often find their testimonies called into question because they were drunk when the crime took place. It's good then that a new study reported in the Daily Mail this week will hopefully stop the police from dismissing sexual assault claims from women who were drunk at the time. The study by Dr. Heather Bellow and the team of the University of Leicester shows evidence that victims of sexual assault who are drunk during the crime can still report accurate information when interviewed by the police. Findings from the study are now being applied to develop national guidelines for how the police could interview sexual assault victims who are intoxicated during the crime. Although I'm pleased that the research is being taken seriously, it still makes me want to bash my head against the table in impotent rage that there was even a need for a study like this in the first place. Why, when a woman reports that she has been raped whilst drunk, is she not believed? I have sat in on a trial where a girl claimed she had been assaulted, and it is an incredibly difficult thing to watch. Imagine being that girl, having to stand up in front of a group of strangers and the person who raped you and recount in detail, blow by blow, what happened to you. Imagine having every gap in your memory questioned. Why would you choose to make that up? Well, I can find a list of reasons. Anyway, another finding from the study was that women will be more likely to have a patchy memory of the events if they had consumed booze. Often in trials, the full and complete testimony is considered more truthful, but the study finds the women were no more likely to get the details that they did remember wrong than those who had not had a drink. Of course, discrepancies might occur when they are put under pressure to remember something that they can't recall. That's something taking place now in the trial of Owen Labrie, where at his school there is allegedly a tradition of giving a senior salute whereby older students invite younger students to have sex with them. The defense attorney has questioned the alleged victim repeatedly on inconsistencies in her testimony. Can you imagine the horror? The study, by its very existence, this independent author concludes, speaks to a broader issue that even in 2015, the onus still seems to be on the woman to provide evidence that she is credible enough to be believed. Why is the assault that causes a broken arm easier to believe in? Well, the answer is that it isn't.
Well, I can suggest an important disanalogy here. Namely that people don't generally want to get their arms broken. Like, this is a very rare thing that someone deliberately has their arm broken by someone else. But people do want to have sex. So even if you have some sort of physical evidence that you did have sex with this person, well, it might be consensual, you don't know. Whereas if you have physical evidence that your arm is broken, then you can be pretty certain that either there was some sort of accident or a crime has been committed.
Yeah, at least a portion of the story may indeed be true. In the example that this author has been provided, a hypothetical example. On the other hand, why would one choose to make that up? Because a girl was claiming to a bunch of strangers and whatnot. Well, sometimes those who make that up don't even know themselves why they did it, or at least they claim not to know. There was recently an article that I eventually decided against it to be included in this news section, with another false rape allegation proved in a court in Norway in the Bergen area. The Bergen area seems to have a problem with false rape allegations. They already have like the fourth this year, or they prosecute them better. I don't know. And in an interview with why she did that, the false accuser, she could not answer. Why? She says, I don't know why I did it. So,
yeah,
I mean,
that doesn't mean that she actually doesn't know. Maybe she knows, and it's just admitting it would be too embarrassing or would make her look too bad or something like that.
True. That's why I said, or at least they claim they don't know.
Yeah, okay.
So, I mean, there are a myriad of reasons why people sometimes men, but most often women, at least as we look, would invent a rape story. There was recently in this country a 14-year-old invented a story of gang rape uh, because she didn't want to face her mother's wrath because she got late 30 minutes at home. She was supposed to be home by 10 p.m. and she got at like 10:30 or 10:40, and because of that, she invented a gang rape story. Another 17-year-old recently almost destroyed the career of a male nurse. Also accused him uh, of rape because her parents were suspecting that she may no longer be a virgin, which was true, but that's a different story. I mean, there are a myriad of reasons why women and girls and sometimes men would invent a rape story. This idea that women would never invent rape stories is just ludicrous. People do lie.
I I believe the argument here goes something like this: that if you're a rape victim, having to go to a court and having your entire story questioned, having to relive all these memories, is incredibly horrible. So why would you want to go through that unless you were actually raped? Well, of
Oh.
course, this argument is just question begging and entirely stupid, because the horribleness of this depends on actually having been raped. So if you haven't been raped, then quote unquote reliving these memories is not painful, anything like that.
Hmm.
Probably maybe you're sort of uncomfortable because you have to lie in front of people, or maybe you take some sort of pleasure in doing that, but it's certainly not being traumatized.
Hmm. 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 And, this article is just the latest of a very, very long stream of ideological feminists just opposing outright to the very civilized value of due process and presumption of innocence. And this is the worrying part, the overall trend with so many jurisdictions trying to appease these lunatics and in the process, pretty much discounting due process rights.
Yeah, it's like it's completely outrageous that you actually have to prove your accusation. What? This is
Yeah,
2015.
yeah. What a barbarian society. In 2015, just like in 1900s, you have to prove the bullshit that you're asserting in court. What an oppressive and barbaric society, isn't it? Amazing. No, in all seriousness, what the hell is wrong with these people? And independent is not really guilty free. I mean, the independent is the place where you expect to read such nonsensical rants. And the independent is also the place that it said that it's time to ban all white men from British universities because potato or something. I mean, the independent is a very, very special place when it comes to rants like these. But still, the study reported in the Daily Mail and the fact that that particular study will be used in the national guidelines, that's still a real phenomenon, regardless of the opinion of this ideologue. And I think these kinds of trends are worrying. The fact that the police is trying to cater to what they perceive as public backlash, but what in reality is rather a dilettante minority that is very vocal.
Yeah, though I wonder how much they will actually implement any of that. Maybe they just say, yeah, yeah, we'll do that, and then they actually ignore that. I could certainly imagine that.
True story. Yeah, yeah, true story. I mean, some policemen will say, "Yeah, yeah, we'll take care of it. We'll investigate, ma'am. Of course, we give a shit."
Yeah.
And then they come back to their car and say, "Who the fuck gives a shit what she wanted?" And they just leave. Yeah, I totally agree, man. Totally agree with that. I can certainly see that happening. But still, I mean, I don't know. It's just annoying, and the fact that there are so many people that actually believe that, oh, but if the woman is drunk, then definitely she could not consent. Well, if we take that to the logical conclusion, then if she could not consent, then she could not also provide accurate description of events. But then this ideologue says that, well, if she's drunk, she cannot consent, but can provide accurate consent. What? You can't have both. You're either unconscious or you're not.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Okay, let's go to the next one.
Okay, this one is from the Taz from Germany. It's entitled, quote, "Dad bashing evokes laughter," unquote. This is an interview conducted by Thomas Giesterkamp, who is a known German feminist who is sort of among the German MRA community, sort of infamous for publishing these really slanderous reports on the men's rights movements, where he connects into all sorts of neo-Nazis and all sorts of stuff like that. So just that for framing. So on to the interview. So the interviewer, Miss Streidel, why does a woman who became known as a feminist and an quote-unquote alpha girl now seek to promote herself as someone who understands men? Barbara Streidel, I have two sons, 4 and 7 years old, and I think the topic of fathers is very important. Family-oriented men need to finally step forth from the shadow of the almighty, quote, German mother, unquote, as Barbara Winken so impressively described her in her new book. Fathers are not second-class mothers. Today's image of fathers is often akin to a caricature. While mothers are exalted, ironic dad bashing is still a surefire way of evoking laughter. Dad month and the vice chancellor who took 12 weeks parenting time haven't changed much about that. The interviewer, the proportion of men in parenting time has risen from 3.7% to 30% since the introduction of the dad month. But so far, feminists are not particularly happy with that. As an explanation, this sort of dad month they're referring to is that you get a certain amount of paid parental leave if you have a child, and I think it's 12 months in total. And now, sort of recently, there's been a law that both parents need to take at least 2 of these months, otherwise they just lose that these 2 months. So yeah. Okay, so on with Ms. Streidel. Many criticize that 3/4 of fathers, quote unquote, only use 2 months of the paid parenting time, that this is only a free rider effect because otherwise this financial claim is lost. I think that 2 months are better than 0 months. Most fathers want to reduce their working time afterwards, and this is what it's all about after all, since the time when a child needs to be taken care of doesn't end after 1.5 years. Don't the obstacles for, quote, new fatherhood, unquote, predominantly lie in society and in businesses? Of course, this isn't just about mothers wanting to make parenting decisions on their own. A considerable number of fathers are blocked by stubborn bosses who think that children and a career don't go together. But there isn't anything that's better for a child than a father who takes on responsibilities, not just chores. We must break open the fossilized structures of the workplace, where people with children are sometimes seen as if they had an incurable disease. Just like women bump into the glass ceiling because they are in their reproductively viable years, men bump into prejudice when they demand to take their family time. We live in a Janus-faced society, which on the one hand condemns the supposed birthing strike of female university graduates, but on the other hand does not ensure family friendliness in businesses across both sexes. What stands out in your book is your empathy with divorced fathers. That's rather unusual for feminists. I myself live in a patchwork family. My partner has 2 adult children from a former marriage. I got to know my husband when he was already a father. His very close relationship to his 2 daughters is the result of hard work. He fought to continue to be a father after the separation. Most children of divorce grow up with their mothers and only see their fathers on weekends, during holidays, or even less frequently. And this isn't always because of the fathers. I wish to contradict a common prejudice. Not all fathers who live separately from their children because the relationship to the mother broke down sought this additional separation. They only accepted this risk. Thus, we need to get away from the image of the irresponsible ne'er-do-well who steals away at the deep of night in search of younger legs and breasts, while leaving his children behind like a pair of worn-out socks. So it's interesting that
it sounds to me like that feminist who was in the US who was shocked about the kangaroo courts in the universities right after her son has had to go through it. Until then, she outright denied their very existence. This feminist now has probably realized that her sons are going to have a not so privileged life, and as such, oh, maybe there is a problem there somehow.
Kind of seems like reality has a non-feminist bias.
Gee, I think. Yeah, I mean, I can't seem to find big things to disagree with Miss Stradl on this particular article. So.
Oh, I do.
I said big things.
Yeah, actually, it is sort of a big thing that she that she never sort of questions the idea that that equal parenting is somehow somewhat desirable, or that these things have to be split up 50-50 ideally, because otherwise that's unequal and therefore bad. The whole egalitarian stuff that we talked about in the previous show. Also, there's this idea that that ensuring this sort of equality is all this is all on society, and that society is Janus faced because on the one hand it criticizes low birth rates, on the other hand it does not reward parenthood on the job. Well,
yeah,
the thing is
that is a
very simple
particularly
explanation for
idiotic
that, is
argument.
that there is no such thing as society. There's just individuals who have different opinions, different preferences, and some of them think that there should be more higher birth rates. Others think that businesses should do more to accommodate mothers and fathers, and others who and there's others who go against either or both of these ideas. It's just that there's some sort of contradiction here. It's just nonsense. Society is just a very heterogeneous thing that's made up of lots of these small parts. It's not some
unified collectivist march that thinks the same and acts the same or similar and whatnot. I'm thinking, I mean, wasn't the birth rate in Germany higher in the 70s than today? I would presume it was.
No, it's really low. It's like 1.4.
Yeah, so I mean, and in the 70s, I would presume that the policies for parental leave were less egalitarian than they are now. So maybe, just maybe, what policies the government enforces upon businesses is not really that relevant when it comes to increase or decrease in birth rate. Maybe there are other factors.
Yeah, certainly.
I mean, where I'm trying to get with this is that when you look at a worldwide scale, prosperity seems to be the driving factor that pushes the birth rates downwards. The more prosperous a society is, the less likely it is to have a high birth rate. Now, the only exception appears to be Britain, but when you look closely, you will see that the first-generation immigrants are the ones who have an anomaly, an exceptionally high birth rate, fertility rate, sorry, and then once it comes to the second generation immigrants, they already have the same low birth rate as the rest of the British population. So maybe, just maybe, it's not about how many parental leave policies you implement. and maybe it's just a bit more of a personal choice.
Yeah, I
There
mean,
are.
these kinds of policies can change things slightly, but the it certainly can't improve or increase the rate from like 1.4 to 2.2 or something. That's just not going to
Mhm.
happen. Maybe without these policies, we'd have 1.3 or 1.2, but it these kinds of policies don't fundamentally alter people's life decisions in a major way.
And yeah, I agree with the reporter who said that, well, it's a bit of a free rider effect. And our feminist says, well, it's 2 months is better than 0 months. Yeah, but on the other hand, it is pretty much like this, as you said. It will only influence things only slightly. And even maybe some fathers will say, if it's available anyway, and I'm paying for this anyway through the taxes that I've paid until this point of
Mhm.
my life, yeah, sure, why not? Let's take 2 months of break if the particular line of work allows that. Because there are, of course, it depends on the field in which one works. I mean, if you're working on the assembly line on Volkswagen, I guess that's acceptable. But if you're working, I don't know, in a very competitive industry such as IT, 2 months or 3 months may indeed be quite a large amount of leave that you just can't afford to take whenever it feels good.
Yeah, and it's the whole thing is that people make people should make these choices based on their own preferences, I think,
Hmm.
and they also should take into account all the underlying economic realities that yes, your employer does not want you to take some month off just because you became a father, because it
Hmm.
is actually going to hurt their business, and so if you want to do that, then you then I think you should have to bear the cost for this privilege, and
Hmm.
this way of having this be a law, it doesn't mean that the costs are not borne by the employees. It just means it sort of gets distributed to all men now, because now
Hmm.
all men in a certain age, and with men, becoming a father can happen basically any age. Um, but sort of it's more likely in your 20s and 30s. Um, but it will just mean that all men now get slightly lower wages to make up for the risk that they can just disappear for 2 months at any time.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, the
And
costs are essentially
I
socialized.
just don't think that this is fair. Why should people who don't want to take this time off have to pay for those who do?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, the costs are essentially socialized, and it's obviously a bad idea because of that. And I'm also asking this question: why is this push that in the first 2 years of the child there has to be as close to equal as possible, to have preferably the mother to take 6 months and the father to take 6 months? Why?
Because
Uh,
of equality. I don't know.
because but I'm thinking over a lifespan of 18 years or whatnot. I mean, until the child becomes an adult. uh if you take things overall, fathers tend to become, unless they become divorced, of course. But if let's take the ideal, or not just the idea, the norm in my country, that the parents don't get divorced. Fathers become more involved in their children's lives once the child goes over the age of 9 or 10, or 11. Uh, so, I mean, overall, fathers are a little bit more equal with mothers involved in their children's lives, just in different stages of life. And these kinds of choices are usually made quite naturally and amongst the members of the family, and not with micromanaging from the almighty state or from the feminist ivory tower. Why can't things stay that way?
Yeah, they should, but I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I'm being an
I've
oppressive
I've never
bigot.
really been able to fully understand this sort of mentality.
No. Yeah, well, I tried to because the communists also were trying to come up with schemes like these. Although to be fair, the communists were a lot more level-headed. They realized that it can't work, and they just dropped the whole idea altogether. As opposed to the modern feminists who just won't admit to being wrong. Anyway, towards the last uh, uh, particular news element coming from the Telegraph. Why don't politicians care about the gender gap in education? What are you going to do about this gender gap? The radio presenter demanded of the minister. I could hardly believe my ears. This was a resounding double first. Not only was it the first time in my 45 years interest in sexual politics that the words gender gap had been used on mainstream media talk about disadvantage for men and the corresponding advantage for women. It was also the first time ever that I have heard the politicians directly challenged to explain how he intended to put it right. The program was BBC R4's World at One last Wednesday, a level results day. The presenter, Sean Lee, was interrogating Nick Gimp, Minister of State for Schools, on discrepancy that has now arisen with 27,000 fewer boys than girls being admitted to university this year. That's what he was describing as, quote unquote, this gender gap. The minister floundered. He gave every appearance of not having been briefed on such a question. More than that, it sounded as if he might never even have thought about it. He said, quote, the gap between men and women is closing, but we've got to do more. He then waffled about the importance of providing the right opportunities for everybody. Does that suggest that university is not the right opportunity for boys so much as for girls? And the discussion then moved tamely on. Even so, this moment may have marked a historic turning point. For most of the last 20 years, it has been largely impossible to get mainstream media to take notice of the systemic disadvantages and inequalities for boys in education, and throughout that period, it has been absolutely impossible to encourage politicians of any stripe to admit the existence of one of the most glaring, logically incontestable sexual inequalities of our time. Things have changed on the media front. On GCSE results day 15 years ago, I was asked on the BBC R4's Today's program to discuss the inexorably widening gap between better grades for girls and poorer performances for boys. I said the phenomenon reflected a problem throughout the education system, but it originated in primary schools, where the interests and needs of boys were often considered as being of secondary importance, and male teachers had effectively become extinct species. I said that I had known numbers of women teachers since the 70s who had made no secret of favoring girls on the grounds that it was the feminist duty to repair women's historic, educational, and social disadvantages. James Naughty, the presenter that day, audibly gasped and was apparently completely flummoxed by this perspective without any intellectual bearings by which to receive it. My words sank without trace, like pebbles thrown into a sea of mud. The idea that in some key areas of our social life, males might share disadvantage solely on account of their gender was such a fundamental heresy against the prevailing feminist orthodoxy of the age that the only way to deal with it was to act as if it had not been voiced. In recent years, the perception that something is profoundly amiss in the education of boys has broadly penetrated mainstream media and is a subject of open discussion in national newspapers. All of the serious papers reported the recent remarks by Mary Carnock Cook, the chief executive of UCAS, when she said, quote, my concern is in 5 or 10 years' time, young men will be the new disadvantaged group. I remain astounded that there is not more political and societal focus on this. She went on to call for a laser focus amongst politicians on the subject. More peoples into an impassive Pacific of mud. On matters of gender, the minds of politicians are uniformly settled. They all, as a matter of fact, think the same. If, for example, you scrutinize the proposals of the candidates for the Labour leadership, you will find not one word on the political concerns raised by the fact that, as Mrs. Kernock Cook has pointed out, boys who live in the poorest 20% of areas or who receive free school meals lag furthest behind girls in university admissions. And white working-class boys are underachieving at school with worse exam results than many other groups. So far as questions of gender are concerned, the sole and exclusive focus of all candidates is upon girls and women. The same is true across party divides and across the Atlantic. There is not a hair's breadth of difference of opinion separating Jeremy Corbyn, David Cameron, and Barack Obama on issues to do with gender. They all share a laser focus on the interests of women and girls and have nothing to say about boys and men. This exclusive fixation won't change until politicians see votes in the issue. If fathers and mothers start confronting candidates on the hustings and on their doorsteps with the question that Sean Lay put to Nick Gibb, quote, "What are you going to do about this gender gap?" End of quote, politicians will have to start coming up with answers. I started yesterday. At a party, I was talking to a prospective parliamentary candidate for our consistency. I asked him Sean Lay's question. His eyebrows shot up and his eyes widened. "That's an interesting question," he said. And then he said, "Very little thought is given to this problem, and it does exist." "Well, that's the question I shall be asking you if you come to my door asking for my vote," I said, "and I shall be expecting some answers." Well, this author has quite a track record on publishing articles like this, which tend to be half good. This one is no exception. Now, some of you may think, oh, but come on, it's not really a bad article. And yeah, it's not really a bad article, but it's not really a fabulous one either. I mean, the whole narrative of his seems to come from this presumption that, oh, but all of these goodies have been done for women, why not have a few more of these goodies this time done for men? Which is a very, how should I put it, unproductive way of framing things.
Yeah, it's like we have women have been getting these unfair advantages, so maybe we should give some unfair advantages to boys and men too. Like, no, why would we just stop giving people unfair advantages? How about that?
Yeah, here's a radical thought. Yeah, and also I've read I always have this habit of scrolling down to comments, even when I expect cancer to emerge. I still do scroll down to comments because in often cases the comments are either as good as the article or sometimes better than the article, and you can always learn something new. And one of the commenters, I know, I apologize, I don't remember exactly which one of the comments, but in the comments it was claimed something that sounds at least in part true. Maybe there is not such a huge big gap as much as there is an inflation of degrees that tend to attract more women than men. I mean, for instance, the gender studies degree didn't exist 50 years ago, and now it does, and it's like, what, 95% female? The journalism school has become more or less not that relevant as it was 50 years ago, because now anyone can be a journalist if can survive in the market. So as a consequence, it tends to attract more women than men, because men who do want to become journalists don't necessarily go to college and just prefer to just, start writing and see how it goes. I mean, there are a lot of factors like these that can create an apparent gap, but in reality, in the degrees that actually matter, the gap is either non-existent or actually favors boys. Now, is that commenter wrong? I mean, at least in part, it sounds sensible. I mean, this definitely is the case with some examples, such as European studies, for instance.
Yeah, I've long held the opinion that any academic discipline that ends in the word studies should just be abolished.
I guess nuclear studies not, though.
Did they actually name that nuclear studies?
Yeah, it exists in Budapest, I think, at the Central European University in Budapest. And they actually do study nuclear energy.
Otherwise, it's like an sort of perfect test of bullshit degree. If it's something named studies, there's of course gender studies, the big one. There's all these ethnic studies, European studies, as you mentioned it. There's American studies, whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I was very shocked when I went to, I was paid to film the festivities of a few kids who were graduating, and one of the groups that I was supposed to film, they were graduating with a degree in American Studies, and I was thinking, what the fuck is this useful for? Why the hell did these kids spend 3 years and a crap ton of time and of money to get a degree in American studies? And some of them had a much lower knowledge about American culture and constitution and law and history than I did, and I didn't even graduate from college. and and I was looking at them and seriously, why the hell did you spend that much time? I mean, you would have definitely been better off going to work on the assembly line on Bosch. You would definitely be better off than going to American Studies faculty within the Babes-Bolyai University. I mean, and
Yeah,
you know,
but then you can land a prestigious job in the you can
assembly
land
line of Siemens.
yeah, you can land a prestigious job in the cultural criticism mines, for example.
Yeah, I remember a few months ago I made a meme in Romanian about the same thing. A girl holding a sheet of paper saying, "I need feminism because my degree in gender studies is as equal as anyone else's." And the next picture was, "Oh, very good, because they just opened a new gender studies factory, in the next county over there, and they need new people." Now, in all seriousness, I do think that at least part of this gap comes from the emergence of these bullshit degrees in the last 20, 30 years. Uh, I mean, I don't know. In 1991, there was no such thing as European studies almost anywhere. By 2000, the entire Europe was filled with these kinds of programs. Uh, Same with ethnic studies. Same with many, many other things. And a lot of individuals who go to quite dubious colleges to study business. And I'm like, I never studied business, yet I own one. So, I mean, this idea that you can't own a business if you don't study business in college, or you can't know the history of Europe without, I mean, what the hell? Seriously? And I think a significant portion of that particular gap comes because of this, and not necessarily because of systemic discrimination, as the author of the Telegraph says.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about business schools about them. I do think there's a certain percentage of the stuff that you taught there that is just sort of hot air. But I also do think that they do teach some valuable skills and valuable knowledge there, and so I wouldn't lump them into the same category as the gender studies and ethnic studies and so on.
No, admittedly, they are slightly less useless than gender studies. I can definitely concede that. But I was saying that individuals going to dubious colleges to study business. I mean, I've met recently a guy who's going to travel all the way to France to study business in some small town, in some godforsaken college somewhere in the middle of France. And I'm like, dude, you're definitely better off if you stay in Bucharest and study business in Bucharest. It's definitely going to be a better choice, and or not studying it at all than to spend a lot of money to go to study at a university that is ranked like what 1,000 and something or 2,000 and something in the middle of bloody nowhere. That's the the kind of case that I was having in mind. But anyway, yeah, I do consider that the business studies is a significantly less useless, or probably more useful than African American studies or whatever. But still, I mean, is there really nothing to the idea that some of this gap may be because of the inflation of bullshit degrees?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot to them. If you look at the actual, like at the actually useful degrees, the science degrees, technology, mathematics, and economics, and medicine, and law, and so on. If you look at just these sort of degrees that actually give you a job, a decent paid job, then you will find that men don't really do badly there. Quite the
Mm-hmm.
opposite.
Mm-hmm. 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 So yeah, I mean, this is where I fundamentally disagree with this author. That the idea that the state should do something, I, I'm not even convinced there is a problem, let alone that the state should do something. although he has the point that in some universities they have this female favoring affirmative action and whatnot, but what the state should do there would be to deal away with those particular privileges, as opposed to create even more bloated bureaucracies to enforce even more privileges, this time for boys and men. And I think that would be a better solution.
Yes, exactly. But it just seems that this is just like too far the open window today that we should just I don't know, judge people based on their grades or things like that instead of just based on their identity. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's the idea that we just treat everyone equally and that's good enough is just I guess too reactionary or something like that
Yeah,
to
yeah,
me.
too
Like
reactionary.
yeah, this like affirmative action. I'm against affirmative action in basically all of its forms, but for women in education, it's just especially ridiculous because women are not doing badly overall.
Yeah, it reminds me in here there was a project funded by Brussels to help more women get into journalism because they're discriminated against. And I wrote an angry article and accidentally I hit the right hashtag, so it went viral. Uh, where I went through the data, and it was like, the worst, the most misogynistic university in this country had like 85% women in the journalism programs. Some others were a bit more progressive, like 97% women. And I was thinking, yeah, we definitely do need to encourage more women to study journalism because there are definitely not enough women journalists. What? And Brussels was willing to pay like 50 million euros for that particular project to provide the alternative courses and whatnot. And I'm like, this is why the European Union will go bankrupt. I mean, and then I made an entire list, and only in this country there are like a few thousand projects that have absolutely no connection whatsoever with reality that they cost at least 1 billion euros. Uh, amazing. And I only looked at what these things pitting men and women against each other. I didn't look on the subsidies awarded to Polish immigrants in Romania. Well, there are like a few thousand Polish families whose their great grandparents emigrated here during some Polish war in the 17th century, and they somehow are now an identifiable group that needs help. None of them even speak Polish, for crying out loud, but they have a Polish name, and that's enough, I guess. Anyway, okay. So with the piece of news, with the news section ended, please introduce us to the scandal in Germany about censoring a particular talk show that offended the wrong people, I guess.
Okay, so there's this talk show. It's called Hard aber Fair, which means something like tough but fair. And a couple of months ago, they had a show about whether gender mainstreaming in gender studies and so on have gone too far. And so they invited 5 guests, sort of 3 of them who were sort of generally arguing in the affirmative. One of them, Wolfgang Kubicki, is a member of the FDP, the Liberal Party in Germany, and um, the other 2 were 2 women. I forgot their names right now. Who one of them is an actress, the other one is a journalist, and 2 people against arguing against it, instead of arguing in favor of gender mainstreaming and so on. Were a Green politician and Anne Wiesurek, however her name is pronounced, who a couple of years ago initiated this Aufschrei hashtag, which was this something like the Everyday Sexism Project, where it's like women reporting the horrible microaggression and so on that they're exposed to. And
Why
she
am I
won
not
like also
surprised?
journalist prizes for that. And she's also, a couple of months ago, she's also written a book on this sort of general subject, which is like a kind of an introduction to feminism, which all the media was hyping up, and was not actually very successful, surprisingly. So anyway, they have this discussion, and it's a pretty spirited discussion. I mean, I've watched it. There's like lots of bad arguments and the occasionally good argument flying around, and it's like not a very sophisticated discussion or anything like that, but it's the sort of thing you expect when you have politicians argue and so on, and you don't expect very sophisticated arguments from politicians and actresses and people who are known for creating some sort of Twitter hashtag thing. So I mean, it was a reasonable discussion, I guess, about as reasonable as you can expect on that sort of topic. With I think the moderator being, I guess, reasonably neutral. He asked critical questions of both sides, and I think did a reasonable job in that conducting that discussion. And well, it was just shown on television, and then no one gave a shit about it until actually that's not quite true. A couple of women's organizations complained to the station, which is the WDR, the Westdeutsche Rundfunk, which is a state-owned TV station, that this sort of program was unprofessional and sexist and blah blah blah. And so now, something like a week ago, the WDR decided to remove this show from the web archives, and this has now sort of created an outcry against the censorship, and this of course, removing this video from the web archive of the WDR has not removed the video altogether. It's of course up on YouTube, and got lots and lots of more views after this sort of story broke. So this is sort of a thing that at least in sort of the German manosphere is now discussed a lot in the last week, and it's also definitely reached the mainstream media. There's been lots of articles about this, and the vast majority of them have been very critical of the WDR's conduct. Now I'm going to read one of these, which is from Stern, which is called "The Insanity of State Television Virtue Terror." So here goes. Maybe it all began with green electricity. In the 2012 talk show Roche und Böhmermann, Sido confessed to not getting quote-unquote clean energy. So Jan Böhmermann interrupted the program and began the conversation anew. The gangster rapper was supposed to live up to his responsibility and give the politically correct answer the second time around. But Sido refused, so the new version shows Böhmermann questioning Charlotte Roche, who obediently advertised Greenpeace and clean energy. It was just one scene from an hour-long talk show, but the WDR seems to have learned from this. If isolated unwanted claims can be corrected, then this should also work for a whole program. And apparently they regard the Heart of Affair program from the 2nd of March 2015 with the title "Down with the Ampelmännchen, Germany's Equality Mania," about the topic of gender equality as being in urgent need of correction. During the discussion, some guests expressed views which some women's organizations found objectionable. Of course, we can't just have everyone expressing their opinion. But above all, moderator Frank Blasberg committed the sin of asking questions. Whether it was actually sensible to spend €1 million to rename the Studentenwerk to Studierendenwerk. He is now accused of exposing gender studies and gender equality policies to ridicule, especially because he mentioned the simple fact that 180 out of 190 chairs for gender studies are held by women. The moral of the story: what is politically unwanted, be it opinion, fact, or just critical inquiry, must be eliminated. Consequently, the WDR Programming Committee decided to remove the program from their web archives. And furthermore, to help the viewers to quickly forget this politically unwanted program, it will just be reshot, with the same guests, in the hopes the second time around they will say the correct things, and the moderator will steer the program into the channels decided by the women's organizations. After all, this is just what Jan Böhmermann did in his day. There is only one sliver of a difference. It was, of course, a joke. Böhmermann was only pulling his guests' legs. Of course, no undesirable comments were removed from the program, and nothing was reshot to force the correct statements. Rather, the ZDF Kultur entertainer only play-acted how virtue terror on state television might look like. He probably couldn't have imagined that 3 years down the line, the WDR would abuse this idea for the rigorous enforcement of political correctness. This is a really nice article. I really like.
So it compares with the comedy show where this kind of softcore totalitarianism, or not so softcore totalitarianism, was mocked. Very nice comparison. I got to admit. I mean, and this is the particularly shocking thing, that the fact that they're genuinely planning to shoot the show again.
Yeah. So as far as I understand, the plan is to have another show on basically the same topic, with the 5 original guests, plus also one professor for gender studies, so that they have this sort of parity of 3 versus 3. And also one of the criticisms that this was made by these women's organizations is that the sort of debate was on was not on a very high level, and it did not include any real experts in gender studies and so on. So that's what they want to alleviate now.
Yeah, as if there is such thing as experts in gender studies. I mean, even the way it sounds, experts on gender studies, pretty much makes me want to puke. But then again, maybe I'm just an asshole. It's very interesting that they want to shoot it again, and yeah, the comparison made by the author from Stern is indeed very apt. Sadly, this is not the first time that this has happened. The state television in Sweden, SVT, did the same not just once, but multiple times. But the most horrific act of censorship that they did was the now infamous documentary Könskriget, or the gender war, that has now been viewed like 10 million times on YouTube at the very least, but admittedly over a span of 10 years. In 2005, essentially after it was aired exactly once, it was supposed to be aired multiple times within the year of 2015 and 2005 and 2006, sorry. It was only aired once, and then the committee, the internal committee of broadcast or something, whatever, very bizarre name, they got together and they decided to no longer broadcast it because it's offensive or something. And just out of pure coincidence, half of that committee was composed by people that were criticized within the documentary. So no conflict of interest. Just an accident, just a pure coincidence. The documentary was very offensive, at least for the people criticized there, because they were made to look like fascists that they really are, and occasionally proven that they kind of kidnapped children and moved them abroad. But it happens. I mean, nothing to see here. Move along. And essentially the version that we now all have and watch on YouTube, and some people still do download it just in case it disappears again, is the version recorded by an amateur who was at home and said, "Oh, this documentary is beginning. Sounds nice," and just pressed record, and that's the only version available. So they had more leeway in 2005. Had it not been that amateur, nobody would have outside Sweden would have seen the particular documentary.
Yeah, of course. Nowadays, once you've uploaded it into the internet, it just stays there.
Yeah, the
it's
internet
impossible to take it down.
Yeah, the internet tends to be forever, and it tends to never forget and never forgive, and that's very unfortunate for the totalitarians of today. Go ahead.
There's this nice, funny comic that I want to introduce on this in the same topic by Nadia Herman, who runs a blog where she posts various comics. It's called Erzähl mir nix. So this comic posted in the chat, it's just basically just stick figures talking, and I'm going to translate the text. So the first panel, what the Association of Equality Commissioners of North Rhine-Westphalia is saying. Quote, "We have succeeded in removing a Heart of Affair program from the web archive because it deliberately ridiculed gender research and gender equality policies." Second panel, what the Association of Equality Commissioners of North Rhine-Westphalia is actually saying. "We have succeeded in making sure that a program that exposed us to ridicule became a YouTube hit, months after anyone stopped giving a shit about it." Third panel, what the Association of Equality Commissioners of North Rhine-Westphalia is actually saying, "We don't understand the internet."
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and I presume I take your word for it that if they had just shut up about it, nobody would have known, or at least most people would not have given a toss about the program, even the people from the non-feminist sector that speak German.
Yeah, I certainly learned about this thing when they wanted to ban it. I've never seen this program before, but since they want to ban it, then I guess I'll watch it.
Yeah, we tend to have this instinct. I mean, if it's forbidden, then I definitely want to watch it or read it or whatnot. I mean, I probably would not have read Milton Friedman had it not been forbidden under communism to do that. So, yeah, I mean, if you want to ban it, they're definitely going to attract more attention upon that particular topic. The same, continuing with the examples in Sweden, the Swedish television also commissioned a documentary by a feminist, no less, called, with a very unfortunate name, it's called Mitt Kampen, which means Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. But the name was unfortunate, but on the other hand, it wasn't really that unfortunate, because most of the older feminists interviewed there, I could definitely say they were genuine fascists. I mean, come on, especially those interviewed from the old, quite aggressive group of the 80s in Sweden, G8, which used to do violent protests against pretty much anything that they didn't like, and the list of the things that they didn't like was quite enormous. But anyway, it was supposed to be a 3-part documentary, but the third part just was no longer broadcast. And then we somehow finally managed to find out through a journalist that was fired from SVT, it was no longer broadcasted because it was offensive. It just put into question too much of the old feminists, because this feminist that made the documentary was trying to talk with older feminists in Sweden to see how Swedish feminism has transformed in the last 40-50 years. And apparently in the third part, it questioned too much of the the all prevailing and the entirely false myth that feminism was someday a while ago something good. And it just questioned that particular myth too much, and as such it was deemed offensive by the censorship panel of the SVT, and censored, and therefore no longer aired. I mean, they didn't commit the same mistake as in 2005 to air it once, just in case someone sees it. So it's better not to air it at all. Uh, Similar things have happened. For a while, BBC had taken down its 1997 Panorama episode, which questioned the idea that women never rape, and it was a very exhaustive report about it was called, I think it was that was the name, The Ultimate Taboo: Female Pedophiles and Rapists. And for a while it disappeared because some particular women's groups said that it's unproductive. To their credit, the BBC eventually put it back online, so they only caved in for a while, but then reversed their decision. And these are the things that I know for sure.
They first caved into the feminist pressure, and then they caved into the outrage about the censorship.
The outrage about that was actually quite small because many people didn't notice. The censorship happened like in 2007, 10 years after the program had been aired. And very few people even remembered about it. So it was a very small discussion on the forums, and then like 6 months later, the same forum said, oh, well, for some reason they put it back, and they replied to all the angry emails that, yeah, well, we now put it back.
Okay.
So I don't know. I don't know if the pressure was really that high, or maybe it was. Maybe someone influential within the BBC, because you know how these things work. There are usually some people who wield a lot of influence, and we don't know about them too much. So yeah, these are the cases that I know for sure that have happened. I'm sure there are a lot of others. There was pressure on this Italian state television Rai Uno to pull from their archives the discourse of Alessandra Mussolini, who essentially said that the feminist agenda is to get rid of all the fathers. And that was particularly nice for the image of Alessandra Mussolini. Suffice to say that she lost the re-elections for her MP position because of that.
Yeah, especially if your name is Mussolini, you probably shouldn't. Probably should be extra careful about expressing views like that.
Tolstoy. And yeah, she is related to the Benito.
Yeah.
So yeah, but there was pressure on Rai Uno to do so, but for all I know, they did not cave in eventually, although there was a lot of shaming in the particular sector of the media that is to be avoided. So yeah, I mean, this kind of thing isn't really new. What's new is that the outrage is significantly bigger than in all the previous cases that I know.
I think a lot of it is definitely the internet, where it's just a lot easier to detect these things and to sort of talk to other like-minded people about this, and to get yourself and each other riled up and to complain about these things. And back in the day when you didn't really have the internet, and when maybe you did not you didn't have anyone in your a sort of immediate circle of friends who felt this same way about a particular topic, then you were just sort of isolated, and you were just the sort of minority of one, and you did not feel like you could really speak out or stand up to something like the BBC. Whereas nowadays it's a lot easier to organize these things and to actually see that there's lots of other people who also have the same opinion that you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in 2005, the idea of an organized anti-feminist sector in Sweden was, completely outside of the Overton window, as opposed to nowadays when you have mainstream politicians writing for AVFM Sweden about certain topics and whatnot. A lot of things have changed in the last 10 years. And in 97, again, the internet wasn't really spread across the world as it is now. The significantly smaller internet presence globally in 97 as opposed to now. Although, your argument even stands correctly. Stands when I compare with Italy. I mean, the pressure to remove some of the less than gushing remarks by Alessandra Mussolini happened, I think, in 2013. And it just didn't work because there were enough voices saying, no, wait a minute, leave it there. Why delete it? We all the taxpayers paid for her to speak that. Let us all how do I put it? Let us all admire the very nice that Miss Mussolini has to offer to Italian fathers. I'm sure everyone will be thrilled. So yeah, I mean, in this regard, yeah, the internet has changed things quite a lot. On a more broader point, is this also a sign that some particular individuals in what I like to call the feminist establishment, or maybe I should say ideological feminists and their useful idiots, that would be a less conspiratorial and more accurate description, is this a sign that they're getting desperate? Because in the past, if they would try to censor something, they would do it more silently and definitely didn't try to censor bigger media. And we had a particularly un-PC article published on Huffington Post and then suddenly disappear, or things like that. But to try to censor a state television and actually succeeded, that's a bit new. I mean, is that a sign that they're getting desperate, or am I wrong? Mr. Yon?
I'm not sure he's hearing us. He may have dropped and it just not show yet.
That's very interesting, because that was essentially supposed to be the last question. Well, so yeah, that's yeah. I see in the chat room he also dropped, so we'll have to wait until Mr. Gunnarsson comes back. Because, okay, let me explain it a bit more, the question for the rest of the people listening to us until Mr. Gunnarsson comes back. The reason why I say that this can be indeed a sign of them getting desperate is because the same happened with every single other totalitarian ideology that was the norm at some point. The Catholic Church became increasingly more desperate as it was losing power and increasingly trying to enforce even more draconian measures to censor things that ran against the narrative that they were proposing. Same happened with the commies. Oh, there we go. Mr. Gunnarsson, you're back? I guess not. As I was saying, the same happened with the the communists, who became even more censorship friendly as time went by, and especially as they were losing power, they were becoming even more ridiculous. Mr. Gunnarsson, with how many accounts are you willing to join us?
I am back now. Lost the connection for a moment. I don't know why the other account is still there.
Anyway, did you at least get to hear my question before dropping out?
No, could you repeat it?
Yeah, my question, I think the last one, considering the time, was that is this a sign of the feminist establishment, or what I'd like to call the feminist ideologues and their useful idiots? Is this a sign of them getting desperate? Because every totalitarian becomes even more desperate as he or she, whatever, is losing the power. Is this a sign of them getting desperate, or am I wrong entirely on this analysis?
I'm not certain. I think there's a little bit of that, but if you're about to sort of lose your grip, that means you might want to intensify the censorship. But just because you're censoring doesn't mean that you're actually losing your grip. I mean, a lot of sort of totalitarian regimes at the high point of their power, they still use lots of censorship. So, I mean, it's difficult to say here. Also, I'm not entirely certain if it really is if this sort of censorship is as futile as it is often portrayed. With the idea of the Streisand effect, that if you try to censor it, it will just have it will actually just backfire and have much bigger impact. Yeah, that definitely happens in a lot of cases. But the thing is that we don't know in how many cases censorship is actually successful, because if you successfully censor something, then you don't learn about it. So it's sort of a quantity that you can't really get at. You don't really know how many cases of successful censorship there are, because by their very nature you don't learn about them.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, well, I guess we covered pretty much everything that was to cover, and in a very nice, just 90-minute podcast, which is not as bad as 120 and still not as short as 1 hour. So yeah, I really don't have anything else to say. Do you have anything else to say, Mr. Gunnarsson?
Consider taking that red pill.
Yep, take the red pill. Bye, everyone.